Howdy folks, Irish Identitarian here, and I want to raise a alarm for my American friends as well as people around the world, as this House resolution does not just affect the United States, but it affects us all, as it is a precedent for more things like this throughout the Western world. What I'm talking about here is House Resolution 569. It is introduced to the House. It is yet to be passed. And it seems to be quite popular. Yay. Now, I find a few problems in the wording of the verbiage of this resolution, at least as far as I've read. And the title is Condemning Violence, Bigotry, and Hateful Rhetoric Towards Muslims in the United States.
Whereas the victims of anti-Muslim hate crimes and rhetoric have faced physical, verbal, and emotional abuse because they are Muslim or believed to be Muslim.
Now, this has happened. We can't deny this.
Whereas the constitutional right of freedom of religious practice is cherished in United States value, and violence or hate speech towards any United States community based on faith is in contravention to the nation's founding principles.
That's a tricky one, folks. Any nation has the right to define what religions are acceptable. The idea of freedom of religious expression in the United States was a mistake, as far as people on the alt-right, new right, and various libertarian camps are convinced. We all know that just having an open-door policy in general, accepting everyone and all of their beliefs, is ridiculous. We all need to be able to define whether or not somebody's belief system is ultimately going to be a harmful effect upon the society. An example that doesn't really make much sense, but I'm going to give it anyway because it's extreme. If NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, declared themselves to be a religion, just like Scientology, they would technically come under the protection of the federal government and the Constitution of the United States because they are a faith. However, there shouldn't be any legislation passed towards violence, bigotry, and hateful rhetoric directed towards pedophiles, religion or not. But here's me saying things that we already know. Next, the resolution states,
whereas there are millions of Muslims in the United States, a community made up of many diverse beliefs and cultures, and both immigrants and native-born citizens.
This is perfectly fine if it wasn't in the context of Muslims. It continues.
Whereas this Muslim community is recognized as having made innumerable contributions to the cultural and economic fabric and well-being of the United States society.
This is a statement that doesn't require any substantiation of fact. It just needs to be agreed with by the fellow politicians that will be voting on this. And it's just lucky enough for them that they don't have to prove this, that it merely has to be a belief, because it can be proven. What have the various different beliefs and cultures of Islam given to the United States?
Whereas hateful and intolerant acts against Muslims are contrary to the United States' value of acceptance, welcoming, and fellowship with those of all faiths, beliefs, and cultures.
Again, the second part of this statement is utterly untrue. Even though the United States Constitution and the federal government itself has opened up the United States society to an unacceptable degree, this idea of welcoming those of all faiths, beliefs, and cultures just isn't actually true.
Whereas these acts affect not only the individual victims, but also their families, communities, and the entire group whose faith or beliefs were the motivation for the act.
What is being stated here is that Muslims need a special protection, need to be recognized as a minority. Because when you do one thing to a Muslim because they are a Muslim, then you have done that thing to the whole community. Much like Black Lives Matter will tell you that if you shoot an African American without due cause, you have effectively done that to the whole African American community. That right there is a cherished position in society. To be a protected group, to be separate and apart, almost like a endangered species. This should insult Americans to their core.
Whereas Muslim women who wear hijabs, headscarves, or other religious articles of clothing have been disproportionately targeted because of their religious clothing, articles, or observances, and whereas the rise of hateful and anti-Muslim speech, violence, and cultural ignorance plays into the false narrative spread by terrorist groups of Western hatred of Islam, and can encourage certain individuals to react in extreme and violent ways.
Let me just stop there in the middle of this statement. This is another belief as opposed to a fact. Most Muslims are not terrorists. This is true. However, most people in any country that must have a war waged against them are not active combatants. This is how societies operate. Most are not active combatants. Most are trying to get on with their lives and just get by. And what we're seeing here in the United States is a mass transplant of population into the United States of Muslims. It's not so much that every Muslim is a danger to the United States, but the culture is a danger to the United States, just like any country that needs to be warred against. The statement continues.
Now therefore be it. The House of Representatives expresses its condolences for the victims of anti-Muslim hate crimes. 2. Steadfastly confirms its dedication to the rights and dignity of all its citizens of all faiths, beliefs, and cultures. 3. Denounces in the strongest terms the increase of hate speech, intimidation, violence, vandalism, arson, and other hate crimes targeted against mosques, Muslims, and those perceived to be Muslim. 4. Recognizes that the United States Muslim community has made countless positive contributions to the United States society. 5. Declares that the civil rights and civil liberties of all United States citizens, including Muslims in the United States, should be protected and preserved. 6. Urges local and federal law enforcement authorities to work to prevent hate crimes and to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law those perpetrators of hate crimes. And 7. Reaffirms the inalienable right to every citizen to live without fear and intimidation and to practice their freedom of faith.
What's shocking about this House resolution, even though it does not lay down any legislation, is that these things are already enshrined in the United States. They do not need to be regurgitated. Over the past 70 years, there's been a continuous effort to make sure that people of different creeds and faiths are not unduly targeted. With the exception of African Americans, there hasn't been any significant move to secure any minorities in the United States. But now, for some reason, this statement needs to be made about Muslims. This conveys I don't know what it conveys. What does it convey? It's very sinister. Why do these things even need to be said? They're already within the law. And I know this is a very childish argument to make, but what is this bullshit about hate crime? Any attack of a person is a hate crime. When you attack someone, you hate them. It is a hateful act. And if you want to tell me that there's a difference between an act of callousness and an act of hate, then you have to demonstrate to me a scientific way that you can determine what has occurred in this person's mind to make them launch this attack. You have to tell me, how is this necessarily born of an emotion of hate or a psychology of hate? I'm pretty certain that the people who have done terrible things to Muslims in the United States, which is absolutely fact, this has happened, not giving a judgment on it, positive or negative, but for the majority of the cases, these people do not necessarily have any history that we can point to that suggests that they have a particular hate towards this group of people. They are ordinary people responding to a danger that they sense. We're due to see more things like this in the future, so we must be on guard.